That's some of the best career advice that I've heard in a really, really long time, slash maybe ever.
I appreciate that. I think I honestly think that the career advice and perspective I have, which I give to a lot of my friends now, is an accumulation of the perspectives and advice of probably like the 50 or 100 smartest people in our world. Like I've read everything that like Jeff Bezos has put out there, that Sam Altman, Paul Graham, Fred Wilson, all these people have put out about early career decisions and career advice.
Yeah.
And I think I've also just chatted with a lot of people about this topic. So
Welcome to The Mountain Pass, a podcast about lifelong learning, curiosity, and our wonderful brain. Topics we love at Alp Audio. But this isn't a podcast about Alp, the product. Rather, it's conversations driven by our curiosity. Today, I'm interviewing Michael Spiro. I wanted to talk to Michael about the meeting point between learning theory and learning practice. Michael recently finished his bachelor's degree in finance and entrepreneurship at Washington University in St. Louis. But he's also been incredibly active in applied learning, as in getting hands-on experience in the fields that interest him, mainly being a VC campus partner, a VC summer analyst, a data analyst intern, and most recently the founder of the Takeoff, a media initiative focused on long-form interviews that are focused on business, investing, and the venture capital landscape targeted at students. Enjoy.
So, Michael, I'd like actually to explore the contrast between your university learning and your practical learning. And by practical learning, I'm referring to all the internships and summer jobs, and also campus activities and campus jobs that you've been up to. What are you getting from each one? Do they tie together? Do they contrast? Are you learning something here that contradicts something that you're learning there? And just in general, kind of give us the overview of what a degree in finance and entrepreneurship looks like these days, also post-COVID, but also just in general.
absolutely. And first of all, thanks so much for having me on the podcast today. I guess just to give a super brief background. So I just finished up an undergraduate degree at Washington University in St. Louis, where I did a double major in finance and entrepreneurship. With that experience in the classroom, a couple of internships over the summer, as well as one throughout the school year, and then a bunch of experiences kind of throughout the school year on campus, in the sense of building up and running clubs. And we'll dive into all of those, but the way I've kind of viewed it is my learnings in the classroom at WashU were really a way for me to learn the foundation, of entrepreneurship, of finance, of operations and supply chain, of marketing, of, data analytics and statistics. And, I kind of viewed the courses that I took as a way to get off the ground, learn some things that will obviously be helpful for me, both in the near term as well as longer term, but also really just to figure out. I think a few of the courses I took freshman and sophomore year, both within the business school as well as outside of the business school, really sparked my interest to go and learn more, dive deeper. I think I, have spent a lot of time in the startup and venture capital communities over the past 2 to 3 years, I'd say. Coming into college, I didn't really know much about those worlds. And it wasn't until my freshman year when I took an intro to business course at my university where I was really, exposed to the world of startups, to what venture capital is, to how do these companies get funded, and, how a company like Apple or Google went from a very early stage company that was just a couple of people, or one person with an idea. They essentially do SaaS to manage SaaS. So where there's so much new software as a service that companies and employees are using and purchasing all the time, it becomes increasingly difficult to actually manage all of this and to keep track of software spend and to make sure everything meets compliance and security standards. So Intella really helps companies go and manage all of this. They were actually just acquired a couple of months ago by SailPoint, so it's been a really exciting and fun journey and ride. But I think that experience at Intello, I don't think I would have even been interested in it without taking that first intro to business course at WashU. So, I think that's a pretty clear example there of how some of the learnings I had in class really translated to, internships and job opportunities that I was interested in and was able to get and then kind of learn from. From there, I'd say I've had a pretty similar experience throughout my 4 years at WashU, where I would, use my courses and the learnings I was having there as a way to figure out what I'm interested in diving into more. Whenever there's a topic that one of my professors would touch on that really caught my interest, regardless of how far in depth we went on it in class, I would always go and try to learn more on my own, whether that was looking up articles, reading books, listening to podcasts, finding documentaries on YouTube or Netflix. I think that really ties into just a desire and something that I believe very strongly in, a desire to learn as much as possible and to continue learning and to never stop there. So, throughout the past few years, I've done 2 internships with early stage venture capital firms, which once again, I think kind of come off that interest in the startup and VC community that I developed at WashU as a result of some of the early courses I took. And then I also did an internship at a growth equity firm last summer, which once again, I think was a lot of, I learned a lot at these internships at early stage venture capital firms, but I also really enjoyed kind of getting into the business models and financials a little bit in some of the courses I took at WashU. And I saw that internship at the Growth Equity Fund to, really be a great way to complement some of those earlier stage learnings in the investing space with some later stage things where, I'd actually spend more time looking at metrics and past financial performance. So, I really see there to be a lot of complementary aspects of the learnings in the classroom, as well as some of these internships that I've had. I think getting real world experience is an incredible way to apply things that you've learned either in class or on your own time to the real world and to see, what learnings and theses and theories, what they actually mean in practice. And so I've kind of used, my academic experience as well as just the free time I've had over the summer, as well as throughout the semesters while I was still in school, as a way to learn as much as possible, to compound the learnings I was having in class with things outside of the classroom, and to really try to develop and become, the best version of me that I can be to position myself in the best place moving forward now, recently graduating and to allow myself to be as successful as possible moving forward.
A real lifelong learner.
To some extent.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was flashbacking to my own first degree and my master's while you were talking, because the mix of doing something in, I'll call quote unquote the real world of business, finance, investing, whatever it is, while you're also in class is incredibly valuable. And my flashback was throughout most of my bachelor's in business, what I found was that a lot of the frameworks that we were learning, it's not that they were bad, it's not that they were irrelevant. A lot of these stuff are tried and true frameworks and principles, but I had no experience. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. And I also had nothing that made what I was learning concrete. And so I never had any way to apply it. I never had any way to look at them from a different angle and say, oh, that's interesting. I'm doing this at work or I'm doing this in life, and that's how this makes sense and fits into it. And then later on, when I was doing my master's and actually was already working, I remember learning Porter's forces, the 5 forces of the basically Porter's 5 forces model, and thinking this would actually really benefit our team at the startup that I was working at if we applied it. But there's no way anyone there will ever take the time to sit down and research it and put it into practice thoroughly enough, because we're doing things from today to tomorrow to next week, and there isn't that long process. So that's what was going through my mind while you were talking, and kind of the beauty of being able to apply it and go through the internships and then go back to class, whether that's simultaneously or over the summer?
Absolutely. I think, as you touched on, I think it is really important. Um, I would add to that it's also really difficult, right? I found it, especially sometimes, and this is definitely something I experience, and I'm sure a lot of other students in particular experience this, but when you are so young and you don't have as much real world experience and haven't even completed all of your courses and study, it's sometimes difficult when you're actually in these internships or jobs, or if you're trying to build something on your own, to actually know the best path to moving forward and to be able to think through strategy and things like go to market and growth. A lot of that I think comes with experience, whether that's in the real world testing things out, or even in the classroom where you learn what different companies did. One of the most beneficial aspects of my education, I think, in the classroom was case studies, Harvard Business Review studies, case studies, as well as some other ones, and just being able to learn what some companies did in the past. Dropbox is one that comes to mind, but learning about the early days of these businesses, some of the pains and struggles they had early on and how they fought and combated those, I think is so important. And I think as people who are trying to go and build things and do things via internships while they're so young and still in school, I think sometimes just not having enough knowledge, or wide enough breadth of knowledge can sometimes be difficult. And I think that's where it's so important to, and be comfortable asking questions and really focusing on learning. There's always so much more room you can grow. People like Jeff Bezos, even, there's so much for him to learn that he doesn't know. About Amazon as well as so many of the other areas. So I think really having a learning first mentality, as well as being open when you don't know something, is just so important to really be able to grow as much as possible and help whatever organization you're in succeed to the best extent possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. We actually spoke about that, I think, on our first podcast. I was interviewing a good friend named Stephanie, and she joined the tech ecosystem without a tech background, found herself working at SAP, which is a heavy duty software enterprise solution company, and working with deep tech startups. And just being in the room and having the bravery to kind of say, excuse me, what does that even mean? So that's one critical part of it. But I was interested, you touched a second ago on like not knowing enough to really look at things critically. Are there any frameworks that you remember learning about, either in class or in a case study or even in a podcast or a newsletter or something like that, and all of a sudden having it click?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there are any particular frameworks that come to mind. Um, Obviously everyone works very differently in how they approach problems and go about problem solving. I think for myself personally, when I approach a problem or have something in front of me, I typically try to do as much research as I possibly can early on, to learn as much about the problem space and what I'm going after and trying to solve. Whether that's doing research on my own, or hopping on the phone or on Zoom or meeting in person with people who are experts in that field. My approach is typically to try to learn as much as possible early on, and then from there to kind of weed out and narrow down from those learnings that I've made from all that research, to really narrow down on the best way to actually go about attacking and solving that problem, and figuring out the best solution and path moving forward. And so while I would come back to the fact that I wouldn't necessarily say I have certain frameworks that I use that are labeled, that I've learned about in class or on my own time. I'm sure that the way I kind of go about problem solving has been influenced a lot by frameworks I have learned about in class, frameworks I've learned about and read about on my own time. And so I think for me, it's been a great way so far to analyze problems and to go about solving certain things that approach them that present themselves to me. Obviously, everyone has a very different way that they go about problem solvings. I have worked with people in the past who, when they see a problem, they essentially try to brainstorm a few different ideas and potential solutions, and then from there kind of weed out which of those may work and may not work. I think everyone, has a very different approach to solving problems, but figuring out what's best for you, but also what's best in each scenario. Because, sometimes the way I typically go about problem solving isn't going to work. So I think just having an understanding of all of that is really important, and can kind of allow yourself, I should say, to be in the best position to succeed and really solve these problems as they present themselves, whether it's in, school, business, your job, with your family, or wherever else it may be.
Yeah, I think going deep in topics is really important when you want to solve any problem. The Dunning-Kruger effect happens to me every single time I start working on anything new. So I always have to give myself, 2 weeks to get over the hump, go into the trough of despair, and then kind of start climbing out of it. So going deep, definitely necessary, especially over time. What about going wide? I think on campus, part of the joy of being a student is being able to broaden your horizons, also kind of breadth-wise, and being exposed to different topics, different things, different internships, clubs, activities. And I think you've definitely done a lot of those. How do you think that plays into it? Kind of also the upskilling, also just getting exposed to different things, and just getting curious about what you want to kind of dive deeper in. And is there also synergy between those?
Absolutely. I think, as you touched on, going wide and really having a wide understanding of viewpoints, of topics, of, career paths, of ways to think about the world and go about solving problems, I think is so incredibly important, both on an individual level as well as, for the greater society. It is very easy for people to be incredibly, narrow-minded at times in whatever their beliefs or viewpoints or desires are in life. And I think if we can have more people who are really open to learning as much as possible about as many topics, as possible, about as many viewpoints as possible, I think we can have much more productive conversations, discussions, can move society forward in a much greater way. I think the way I've gone about this, and frankly, I wish I would have taken a wider range of courses in terms of topics while doing my education. Both of my parents did liberal arts degrees while they were in school, and I think that's something that they value a lot and that I value a lot too. I just think I didn't get as much exposure to really niche courses while at WashU, just given I was in the business school there, so kind of predominantly focused on business oriented courses. But at the same time, I spent a lot of my freshman year, while taking a few business courses, I tried to take as many really interesting classes as possible that I didn't think I would, necessarily know much about. I wasn't sure if I'd be interested in, but that I thought would be fascinating and a great way for me to explore expand my horizons and explore new things and new topics. I remember one of the first courses I took during the fall of my freshman year was a religion course where we basically just explored tons of different religions, both that exist now and religions that had existed in the past, exploring the relationship between religions and tribes and things like that. And it was such a fascinating course. I remember always leaving class and always finishing the homework readings and just being like, wow, this is so interesting. It's probably not something I will spend much time on in the future. But then I'm really glad I learned and got to spend time doing. And, there were a few other courses that come to mind throughout my time at WashU that had similar effects. But I think, as you touched on, it's so important to kind of step out of our comfort zone and explore things that we don't know much about, where we may not be interested in spending a ton of time in later, but that learning about could one, spark curiosity, but two, can just open up our minds to entirely new views of the world that we never previously thought were imaginable.
That is the Alp poster boy statement right there. Yeah, that's actually, I mean, one
I
of
love
the
it.
one of the kind of the core theses that I had while brainstorming out, and ever since has been, if we could only help people kind of learn about these different topics, any topics, in the time that they have. I live in Israel, and in Israel, you know, everyone is listening to audio at some point throughout their day, from the security guard at the mall to the guy, checking your bus pass when you get on the bus. And I always had this nagging thought of, if they were listening to anything, Eastern philosophy, Middle Eastern philosophy, comparative religion, anything like that, that would just be so impactful for kind of our country and the region, and just education for all. um, so that was very much a poster boy statement for us. um,
Absolutely. That's great. And I think, one quick thing that I would add on top of what you were just saying, um, I think there's so much time where we passively consume content or media or audio. And, I've thought for a long time about, can we make this passive consumption more educational? And I think, that's a place where Alp really comes in and does so in a really strong way. So I think that thesis and approach is really interesting, and can add so much value to so many people.
well, from your from your mouth to everyone's listening to this podcast. um, yeah, but it's this is really, this kind of conversation has gotten me nostalgic about university, b gotten me frustrated with the way I did my MBA, where I'd call it the worst experience for an MBA, simply because
Wow.
I was doing it. I was doing it, to kind of check market. I'd
Hmm.
gotten into this track that allowed me to kind of streamline it while I was working, and so I got nothing out of it. Not because the program wasn't good, although it could get better, mainly because I didn't invest anything in it. So when you don't invest anything in a program, you also don't get out of it anything, and which is very different from my bachelor's, where I studied Talmud, which is a very, very esoteric field of research in academia. Um,
Hmm.
and I think we were two people in my entire class in my
Wow.
entire year, so it was really like a private lesson with the professors who are experts in their field, and a very, very different kind of experience. And in learning, you really get what you put into it, and I think it's a shame that university today gets associated with that checkmark kind of mentality, where you need to do this to advance in your career. Whether that's true or not, it's just part of the common thought. Um, so I would like to go back and kind of take the time to study things in depth and broaden horizons and take those weird classes. But at the end of the day, when it comes to doing, I think you learn a lot more by doing, by failing, by learning from your mistakes, learning from your successes, than you ever do by learning theoretical frameworks. And the theoretical frameworks that you do learn, you have to apply them. You have to see them in practice. Otherwise, you're not closing the loop. And this is true for kind of practical, topics, less so in research and history and esoteric fields, right? So there is a very clear delineation between social sciences and humanities. And that's a very long segue, but I did kind of want to get into your practical application of basically what you've been learning, which is you got into the world of venture capital and startups, kind of hopping on board from listening in on interesting classes, and at some point during your degree you decided to launch your own, I call it like a mini media publication, because it's not a podcast, it's not a newsletter, it's sometimes this, it's sometimes that, sometimes it's Twitter threads. It's basically like a little, a media company initiative. How do you guys call it? Called the Takeoff.
Yeah, and I think the way you kind of explained it and think about us is the way we think about ourselves, and I would also add to that, it's constantly been evolving in the sense of, we are still figuring out exactly what the Takeoff is, exactly where we're going to focus moving forwards. But for those who are listening who don't know about the Takeoff, I guess first of all, you can learn more by heading over to the takeoff.substack.com. That's kind of where we house all of our written content as well as all of our audio content via podcast. You can access all of that there. But what we are with the Takeoff is, exactly as you said, we are a media publication today that is focused on helping students particularly, though we think our content is helpful for everyone, but we're really focused on helping students learn more about the startup and venture capital ecosystems and worlds. How we go about doing that is in a few different ways. So we started off solely doing interviews with startup founders, operators at unicorns, with VC investors who are on the board of companies that we probably hear about and use every day, and really allowing these people to not only share their backgrounds and stories, which is probably something you can find on a lot of other great podcasts and written newsletter and blog interviews, but we really go in depth on allowing these people to offer advice to students in particular and allow them to share some things that they learned about while in college, but also allow them to offer advice and to share things that they wish they spent more time on while they were younger. And so I think that was a great way for us with the Takeoff to really get into the space of creating media and content, build out a pretty decent following of people who are coming back and reading our newsletters and listening to our podcasts, to learn from these people, right? It's awesome as a 20-something-year-old to be able to go and learn from someone like Sam Altman or Hunter Walk, who he's had on the podcast, and to be able to learn about their backgrounds, but also hear advice that they have for students, which we found is pretty difficult to find elsewhere. So since kind of starting off with those interviews, we've expanded to do a few other things. So as you touched on, we do Twitter threads here and there where we hope is, helpful for our followers and for other people on Twitter to come across. But we also have recently started doing deep dives into different spaces, which is something I have found to be so incredibly helpful, both on an individual level for the people creating these deep dives to learn as much as possible about certain spaces, but hopefully also for our followers and for other people who are actually working in the industries that we are diving into. So we've done a deep dive now into 3 different spaces. So I did one into the SaaS management space. Our co-founder Lucas did one into the behavioral health space, and then our other co-founder Roshan recently did one into the grocery delivery space. And with these deep dives, we are essentially hoping to lay out a framework, and so that anyone can really learn about these spaces, whether it's SaaS management, behavioral health, or grocery delivery, allow them to learn about the trends happening in these spaces, what companies are leading the markets, and what companies have potential to go and become dominant market players in the coming years, and then to also kind of offer our perspectives on the space, why we are so interested in these markets, what companies we think have the most potential to really develop into dominant players in the coming years. And so with these deep dives, we're hoping to get more and more students involved over the next couple of months, doing dives into spaces on their own, building out market maps, and being able to share their findings with, all of our subscribers and followers, as well as, many more people in the world who can kind of come across our content, given how incredible Substack is in allowing people to easily access that. So that's a little bit about what we are with the Takeoff. Once again, the mission is really to help students as well as anyone interested, really help students learn more about the startup and venture capital communities. And, it's been a lot of fun growing so far. It's been tough to build and really grow the Takeoff with school as well. But at the same time, I think, coming back to a lot of what we've touched on, it's really just compounded my learnings across a ton of different areas. So I'm definitely really, really excited that, Lucas and Roshan were interested in coming together and really forming the Takeoff and helping get it to where it is today. And I'm excited for what the future has in store too.
I like how you framed the problem statement for what you're solving for, which is, students don't have access to advice from the venture capital and startup ecosystem, and that's the missing piece of content. Have you found that students are really interested in that? Or I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of, who are your early adopters versus, I'd imagine the majority of students are not coasting by, but super busy with whatever they're doing and not as interested in extracurricular newsletters and things like that. And you guys are really focused on a narrower niche of high achievers, super curious people, lifelong learners who are interested in startups and venture capital.
Yeah, and I think we have definitely seen a few different things kind of develop here over time. We definitely are looking for a pretty niche group of or type of students who are interested in the startup, are interested in the venture capital world, and who are really curious to go and learn more and learn from people who've gone and been a part of and built incredible companies. At the same time, as you touched on, that is a very niche group of people. Probably 95% of students are just focused on getting their courses finished, finding what internship to do the next summer, enjoying their social life, and so we have found it a little difficult at times to really get in the best circles. But I think something that has been so incredibly helpful for us, at least, is we can use the Takeoff as a way to help other people learn. But we can also use it as an amazing way for us to learn, right? It's an incredible excuse for me to get in front of some of the best founders and investors in the world, and to be able to chat with them, have them act as a resource for me moving forward now in many cases. And Roshan and Lucas have seen similar, experiences and outcomes. So, I think, yes, we in focusing on students, we have had to find those niche groups on different campuses and the right touch point of, is there an entrepreneurship organization or club at University X? And if so, can we get in front of the person who runs that organization so that they can spread the word about the Takeoff with all of the club members or organization members? So we've had to go about that pretty strategically. But I think with the beauty of Substack and Twitter, anyone can subscribe. So I'd say right now we have about 1,000 .edu email addresses, so probably around 1,000 students subscribe. But there are also several hundred people who are not students, whether they work in the venture capital community, or they're working at startups, or they're doing something totally different. I'm not entirely sure, just given we can't fully get all of that information from people's email addresses. But I think we've definitely been able to find those niche people on campuses, but have also seen nice growth and readership and followings outside of colleges, which is something that I don't think Lucas, Roshan, and myself anticipated early on, but that has definitely come as a result of, I think, just really honing in and focusing on creating good, meaningful content. Being consistent in that, which we haven't been so consistent in releasing new content over the past couple of weeks. But I think up until that, we were very consistent in getting at least 1 or 2 pieces of content out weekly. And I think that is really important for kind of growing your following and readership and listening for a podcast. But I think it's really interesting, focusing on certain groups of people is always helpful. But I think if you can create content that is helpful and maybe geared towards a certain group or 2 groups, but that's really helpful for anyone, which I think we've done really well with the Takeoff, I think you can really experience a lot of growth there and have as large of an impact as possible and as many people as possible. Even people in those groups where, maybe initially you didn't think they'd be interested or that your content would be relevant for, but that you kind of just learn over time, that they do find learnings from the things you're creating. And so I think that's kind of how we've gone about it on that front.
Yeah, I love how there's a niche for everything on the internet, and it's much bigger than you first think, and sometimes than you second think. It's just so, it's so huge, and there's so many more people interested in what you're doing than anyone ever really imagines in the beginning. But what I really cued in on was when you said that, yeah, even if we're talking to a really niche audience. At the end of the day, for us, this is a great learning journey. And just, us speaking with these people and putting that into writing and forcing our thoughts down on paper is incredibly valuable. And I think that's just a great takeaway for you guys, that like the journey is just as valuable as the end game. I mean, it's something that I've been constantly trying and sometimes failing, but sometimes succeeding to integrate for myself at Alp, because, at Alp, we create these audio courses, and I've been learning so much by being part of the process of creating those audio courses, because if you're going to teach something, you have to understand it the best, and not only understand the material, but also how to convey it. And so you really have to dive in deeply and kind of soak yourself in the material. And that is definitely a rewarding journey in and of itself. It's something I think we struggle with in audio in general. This is kind of a tangent, but audio is a passive format, and how can you make that active, and how can you make the learning not only be passive consumption, but also you then apply it and integrate what you've been learning and what you've been consuming into things that you then produce, because only when you kind of integrate it inside yourself and then regurgitate it in your own words does it really sink in. And so that's something we definitely think about often. To just kind of bring it all together and wrap it up, if you were recommending to students, as a recent graduate, or as the founder of the Takeoff and someone who does talk to a lot of people in the industry who give advice to students, what do you think students should be doing to prepare for the big wide world out there?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question, and can definitely share my perspective and kind of advice here, but I would also take that with a grain of salt, in the sense of I think it's really important to get advice and hear the perspective of as many people as possible when kind of navigating things like this and figuring out, what type of career you want to pursue, what space you want to be in, what individual job role are you most interested in and do you think will be best suited for you. But I guess some advice that I would have is, early on, if you are still in school and you're maybe a freshman or sophomore in school, focus on learning about as many different spaces and job opportunities as possible. So if you're a computer science student, obviously learn about software engineering and product management roles, but also go and learn about what it might be like doing consulting, or what it might be like doing business development or finance. Similarly, if you're a finance student, learn about those other roles that you can do. Product management, consulting versus investment banking. Learn about what it might be like joining a startup in a growth role or an operations role. I think it's so important to have a wide perspective of all the things that you can do with your career post-grad, and then to be able to kind of narrow that down and figure out what you're most interested in. You can do this, obviously by going on Google and doing simple Google searches of, best careers or best job opportunities post-grad, what companies to work for after graduating. There are tons of blog and YouTube videos and podcast episodes geared towards helping students with this. I know Paul Graham and Sam Altman at Y Combinator, I guess he was previously at Y Combinator, have a lot of great content to help students kind of navigate that early career decisioning and path. But also just hopping on the phone or on Zoom with people who are in roles that you might be interested in. Take advantage of your university or college email address and reach out to alumni who are in positions that you maybe see yourself in 15 or 20 years. Get in touch with them. A lot of people are really, really willing to help students. And so I think just trying to learn as much as possible, figure out what you might be interested in. If you need to do internships, to figure out what type of company, whether that's a super early stage company, a later stage startup, a well-developed corporation, what role might be most interesting for you. If you're a comp sci student, if you want to be doing software engineering, product management, or something totally different, take advantage of all the resources that are out there. Get internship and job experience as you see fit to figure out what might be the best fit for you. But really, once again, and I think this comes back to a lot of what we've been touching on this entire podcast episode, is focus on learning. If you do an internship that you think you're going to be really interested in, but you end up realizing that it's not a good fit for you, either because of the role or the organization that you're in, the culture, whatever it may be, take that as a learning experience, right? It's not a negative. It's actually probably more of a positive than anything, because you realize what is not going to be a fit, and from there you can go and learn more about, what type of roles, what type of organizations, what type of cultures may be a great fit for you. Use college and your years as an undergrad or grad student to really start developing an understanding, an idea of where you want to be in the world, of what you want to be doing, and of what type of people you want to be working with, and go from there to figure out, what individual company you should be with, what job role, what team do you want to be with. And so I guess those are some of the, insights and kind of advice I would give to, maybe my younger self 3 or 4 years ago. But once again, I think getting as wide of a perspective um, as possible is really important. So talking to as many people, listening to as many people's advice and insights as possible. Nobody knows you better than you know yourself. So if you talk to 10 people and they all say, oh, you should go do this at company X or Y, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best fit for you. Listen to yourself, figure out what you're most interested in, what you're most passionate about, what type of organization and people you want to be with, and go from there to actually make all of that happen and come to play.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's also a good place to wrap it up. I think that's a good solid insight, which is kind of know yourself, and everything's just a learning experience. So people can sign up to the Takeoff and try it out at Substack, right? Which we said is the takeoff.substack.com. On Twitter, you're mspiro3. Anywhere else people can find you, what you're doing, following along, things that you'll be working on after you graduate?
Yeah, I'd say, head over to the Takeoff Substack. Um, Following me on Twitter is probably the best place to see what I'm up to in the future. But yeah, I have a couple of really exciting things planned for the next few months. So definitely feel free to reach out if, you think I can be helpful with anything. My email is mspiro3@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out via email if I can help with anything over there. But if not, I really enjoyed this episode. So hope everyone listening has a enjoyable experience, and let me know if I can be helpful with anything.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on.